Hello everybody, welcome to our Kingston Alumni Upgrade Masterclass on how to boost your online profits. As I've just mentioned, we're recording this. This will be available on our media library or our YouTube library, and also we might be taking some sort of snips of this for social media, so do be aware if you wanted to sort of contribute in terms of cameras or talking, but this will be recorded. I'd like you all, if possible, to keep your microphones off and your cameras off as well. Jeremy will be sharing a few slides, so if you have any questions as you're going through or something pops into your head, please use the chat function, which we'll keep an eye on some of the questions that will be coming through. At the end, Jeremy's obviously got a bit of time to do some sort of answering those questions and answering. So if you sort of wanted something you wanted to elaborate on, or if you did want to speak, then you can also raise your hand at the end. But I don't want to sort of interrupt Jeremy's flow during the presentation for the first 45, 50 minutes. So just to sort of, please use the chat function as much as you would like to. A big thank you for joining us on thankfully a sunny Thursday after the last couple of grey, miserable days we've had. I'm sure that lots of you, we might be competing with a lunchtime walk, a bit of fresh air. So thank you for joining us. It's appreciated. I hope you find it very useful. I've been fortunate enough to see the presentation that Jeremy's going to be giving in advance, and it's very interesting. And I think no matter what level you're at, you'll be able to find something to take something away with. So thank you for joining, and also we're pleased to see so many alumni who've registered from around the world. Probably the one benefit of a global lockdown pandemic is that we have lots of alumni who and students and people who are able to join us from no matter where they are in the world of Kingston events. So thank you for joining us. Our upgrade masterclasses are a series of events that Kingston alumni, as part of your alumni community, we are committed to your continued professional development, or development full stop. We want to connect you with each other, we want to inspire you, and we want to sort of make sure that you have a lifelong connection with Kingston University. So, whether you graduated last year, this year, or a few years ago, let's say. So we're pleased to have alumni, students, and friends of the university here as part of this event. I'm really delighted to welcome Jeremy Craft to lead this lecture masterclass. Jeremy's consultant, chief financial officer, and has spent a significant part of his career with companies, startups, growing businesses, companies that are looking to sell profit specifically and services online. So there's probably not a better person to ask in terms of how to boost online profits and grow in your business or grow in your World Wide Web presence. Jeremy is a wonderful volunteer at our NEST programme, which is part of our Kingston Enterprise programme. So he supports students who've got business startup ideas. He's got some personal connections with Kingston, and yeah, we're very grateful to have him help here. Jeremy has very kindly offered his time for this session in order that we'd be able to support Kingston students through financial difficulties as part of this pandemic. So if you haven't already and you're able to make a contribution to the Student Hardship Fund, please do so, because it will make such a huge difference to the number of students who are able to basically weather the storm of this pandemic with lack of limited job opportunities and help with some of the basics that they require to complete their studies while they're at Kingston, while they're remote working, while they're remote learning. So thank you very much. We'll put a little link in the chat. We'll keep doing that. And I know Jeremy's also very keen to make sure we plug this. And this is one of the reasons why he's very kindly offered to do this. So if there is any sort of contribution you can make in lieu of an event fee, then please do. So I think I've rambled on enough, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to spotlight Jeremy.
Great. Okay.
So and then I think spotlight for everybody, and then I think you'll be able to share your screen.
Right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. So good morning, everyone. So thanks to Janice for that very kind introduction. So just very quickly, brief intro, who am I? So as Janice said, I'm a CFO, which is a finance person really, but I only work with e-com, technology and SaaS businesses. And I guess I focus on startups, helping them scale up, and also scale ups to raise money. So I do a lot of fundraising for businesses. And what do I actually do? Well, I provide strategic and tactical support to predominantly the founders or the people who started these businesses. So as Janice said, I'm a volunteer at The Nest, and that's Kingston's entrepreneurship incubator. I volunteer as a mentor to young entrepreneurs. And of course, the bit I really focus on is helping them to get their businesses online, but also to help them promote themselves online. So why am I here? Well, COVID is a tough time for everybody, really, but also for businesses. And also, my son was a student at Kingston, which is part of my connection to Kingston University. And I know just how difficult it is, not just in terms of to deal with lockdown, but also financially. So also what we've seen is the move to online business is just accelerating. So what I think would have happened over 10 years is happening over 10 months. So a lot of what I was expecting to see happen over the next decade has really happened this year. So it's good for everybody to have a better understanding about how to make your business successful online, but also think about how you can also promote yourselves online as well, whether you're looking to get a job or to get a better job or build your career. And also, I'm really keen to try and give back. So I did a lot during lockdown to give free advice to businesses that were struggling, but I also want to raise money. So I'm hoping that I do a good job here. You like it, you find it useful, but please show your appreciation by making a donation, whatever you can afford, to the Kingston University Student Hardship Fund. Right, so let's get started. So what I like to do is just a brief intro as to what I want to try and cover off today. We've got a limited amount of time, but hopefully we can get through all the content in the time allowed. The first thing is, I really want to talk about what's important, what I think is important for you to focus on if you're trying to make money online. The next thing is really just a brief intro. Is when we say online, what do we mean by that? Because it doesn't just mean selling through a website, it could be selling through other channels. The next bit is around online marketing, in particular social media, which I think is really important. Everybody gets sucked into spending money on Google. I'm not a big advocate of that, and I want to just talk through how all the different platforms work and how you can improve your profile for your business and for your products. The next thing is an intro into describing the difference between selling online yourself, selling through third parties online, and also selling through traditional channels like wholesale, which is if you're selling product, for example, somebody who can sell the product for you. The next thing is really about modeling all of this, and I've spent the last 5-6 years really trying to educate people in terms of what are the key things they should focus on to determine what a successful business looks like online. And what I'm going to try and do is walk you through what I think the key drivers are, and there's a little table here to explain what I think are the core benchmarks that you need to focus on. The great news is that it may look a bit much on a PowerPoint. It may be difficult to capture it all on this presentation, but we're going to share the deck as well, so you can actually spend some time looking at the content at your leisure. And the last bit, which I've got to make sure we cover off, is that how to measure success and what does success look like. And there's two elements. One is that what I describe as really a cost to buy modeling, which is understanding all the various costs associated with selling a product online. And the last bit, which I think is possibly the most important and tends to get forgotten, is understanding your customers, looking at the core stats about who buys from you, why they buy from you, and who you should target to buy more. Right, so let's move on to the next slide. So what do I think you should focus on? So if you guys are selling online at the moment, or you look at anything online, you hear the phrase return on investment, or ROI, and everybody overcomplicates it. And I think it's really important to just keep this simple and think about what this means. So obviously you've got two numbers here. The first is what you make from an order. So this is how much cash effectively you generate from selling either a product or a service online or through another channel. That's your numerator, and the denominator is how much did it cost for you to generate that order, and that's really the advertising or the marketing that you've spent to generate that business. And I'll talk more about that as we go through this deck. So when you see all those really complicated YouTube videos, just remember it's all about understanding how much you make and how much it costs for you to generate that sale. The next thing, sales or margin. So it won't surprise you when I say to you that it's really important to understand how much you make on an individual order, what all the different component parts are for you to get that sale to a customer. It's not just the cost of product, it's how you get it to the customer and how you get the customer to accept that product. You need customer services, you need to deal with returns, etc. The next thing is what to include in that margin calculation. And what I'll do is share with you some of the businesses that I've worked with. So I think what I'll do to keep it simple is focus on maybe a business selling apparel, fashion, cosmetics, or say jewelry, and that just helps to explain. But the same principles apply as if you were selling a service, whether it's you selling your own time, selling a SaaS platform, software, the same principles apply. The next thing is going back to that ROI. We talked about what it costs to get that order. So that's really the advertising and marketing. And what I'll do is to talk to you about what should be included in that. And really, it's about how much you spend predominantly on advertising, whether it be Google, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, or TikTok. The next thing is how do we measure success? How do you know you're doing well? What benchmarks should you set? And the last thing is, if we've got time, is talk about some really good tactics and strategies you can use to grow and develop your business without spending huge amounts of money. Okay, so what I'd like to do is really go back to basics and just talk to you about how we generate sales online. And when we talk about sales online, that's effectively selling a product through an online website. It may be your website, it may be somebody else's website. And the first key measure is visits or traffic to that site. And they come to the site in two ways. One is people find you for free. So they type in, let's say you're selling shirts, type in shirts, your website comes up. On the first page, someone clicks on it, they like the description, and they come to your website or someone else's website selling your product. That's free, hasn't cost you anything. But the reality is most people find people on Google or a search engine through a paid ad. And if you look at, if you type in anything, if you're searching anything, you'll see there's a little AD that's attached to one of the results that you get on a search. And that's someone who's paid for that ad to be placed on that page. And the way that people get those ads placed, it's a bidding process, okay? So the person who bids the next incremental highest price, Google will list, subject to the fact that they satisfy all Google's rules, and the same applies to Bing. So really the first key measure is traffic or visits to your site. And the next key measure is how many of those visits you can convert to an order, either through your website or through someone else's. So what I want to talk now is about the two key elements here. The first is around the e-com marketing stats. The first is traffic. And if you're using Google now, using AdWords, for example, traffic is measured in two different ways. The first is visits. That's when someone visits a site, but they track the performance of a visitor by session. And the difference between a visit and a session is someone is starting to navigate through a site. So they discount someone coming in and they suddenly realize, oh, cripes, I didn't want that site, and they come straight out. They measure people who they believe, based on their current algorithm, that they're actively interested in navigating that website. That's a session. What they then do is they apply a conversion stat based on how many orders they believe has been processed through that visit. So the next key measure that you need to focus on is you've got traffic to your site. How many of those visits or sessions convert to an order? The next thing is you take your order, and then as long as you're using one of the established platforms for websites, like Shopify, WooCommerce, for example, it'll capture the order value, and you'll be able to measure the cost of getting that session versus the order that you've actually generated. It'll have the gross order value shown to you through the Google platform, which then comes back to this fantastic ROI measure. So we can see this is the first time we can start using it, where you're capturing the order value. And if you're using AdWords, for example, you're capturing the spend that you're incurring for Google Ads. The next thing is the CRM, or the customer relationship management information that you're capturing. And what's important here is that it's important to track the traffic and how much that converts. But beneath all that is how much time are people spending on your site, and also how long you're getting people to come back to you. So one of the key things that you need to measure is not just customers buying from you once, but what do you need to do to get them to come back? And here we talk about lifetime value. And what lifetime value is really a measure as to the value of the orders that you get from a customer over a period of time. And lifetime will vary. So if you're selling fashion, I would say you look at the 12 months. If you're selling sofas, you've got to look at 5 years. If you're selling beds, it's probably 10 years. It's all about what's most relevant to your business. So you need to look at not just how much money you make on a specific order, how much money can you make from a customer. So the next thing I want to just talk about, these are some jargon that you'll see all the time, SEO and SEM. SEM is search engine marketing, and quite simply put, this is about tracking and measuring the performance of paid traffic. Do you remember we talked at the beginning about you get free traffic where people find you through either your URL or through search without clicking on an ad? This is about spending money, getting ads placed either through Google or through social media. And the next thing is search engine optimization. And this is all about making your website work best for you. So really, it's important that, say, if you're using Shopify, you follow all the good rules that they recommend. Make sure on the home site it's really clear what you're selling, so you don't get people wasting their time, or worse than that, clicking on an ad when they're actually not interested in the service or the product that you're offering. And here you want to look at how much time people are spending on the site, and how many people are looking to potentially buy, go to checkout, but then don't complete their purchase, because that suggests there's something not quite right with your site. And you can spend thousands with consultants, but really, what the obvious thing to do is, if you're having problems with people coming off the site or not spending enough time, just follow the rules or the guidance that the platform is recommending, and you might find there's something really simple that actually maybe there's a problem with the hosting, the site crashes, or people can't view the site properly on an iPhone. It may be something as simple as that. So now let's come back to ROI again. So you can see that I think what's important is, once you've understood how much money you make from an order, is to translate that into how much money do you make from a customer, and to think about not so much just how much it costs to acquire that order, but how much did it cost for you to acquire that customer. Because at the end of the day, it's who you should focus on is your customers rather than just sales. Okay. Next, what I'd like to try and do in 10 minutes is try and give you an idea and a feel for how all the different social media platforms work. So I would say that right now, Google has become almost commoditized. So the problem with trying to generate traffic on Google is it's really expensive, because you've got people who know what they're doing, like ASOS or Boohoo, but they'll always outbid you because they can afford to spend a lot of money on Google to secure new customers. Or worse than that, you've got people who don't know what they're doing and just outbidding because they don't really understand how Google works. So I think the best way for you to generate interest and visits to your site is through social media. If you can provide and create really engaging, entertaining content, you're more likely to attract followers, and more importantly, get people who like your products to share their great views and their great testimonies about your products. So quickly left from like, this isn't everything, but this is just the core platforms that you're probably all aware of at the moment. First is Pinterest, fantastic for homeware. So if you're selling anything that people want in their homes, it's great to use Pinterest as a platform to promote your products, to build awareness for your brand. Facebook is probably still the most expansive social media platform for sharing. But a great example is my mum, who's in her 80s, is on Facebook, but my son, who's in his 20s, is not on Facebook. So the reality is the demographic has got older and older on Facebook. And what we're seeing is younger people looking at more exciting, more interesting social media platforms, which brings me on to TikTok, which is something more engaging, more interesting, and more younger people are interested. So for things like cosmetics, fashion, fantastic platform to promote your brand and build a brand through that platform. In terms of interest, what the difference between awareness and interest here is where you've got the ability perhaps to curate what you want people to see. And Instagram is fantastic for this, because you can create the images, create the content you want to share with your customers, which is fantastic, and your followers. LinkedIn's great for services. I would say if you're looking to sell yourself or your products or services to businesses, LinkedIn is the best platform, but it's a very busy space and it's really hard to stand out. So you probably know that most of the content on it is deadly dull and boring, but it's still the most effective way to build your credibility to other businesses. And YouTube, actually still great. Video is a great way to, particularly if you're selling yourself or an idea or service, it's a great way to build credibility, and also by sharing stuff with people, bit like I'm doing on this call, builds trust and builds credibility for you and your business. The next thing is about decision, about how you can engage with people. And so what we can all see is that we get businesses contacting us through email, but also through SMS and increasingly through WhatsApp. And certainly for me, fashion, if I buy anything on fashion now, I always get a message now from the fashion brand through WhatsApp. And the truth is, I'm more likely to, me personally, more likely to respond to WhatsApp than I am to an email, which I probably won't even see, or an SMS message, which will just get lost in all the other content and the messages that I'm getting. And action is really about all this stuff that we're doing on social media is about doing one thing, which is generating sales, whether it's building a brand to build a relationship prior to launching a product, or it's getting people to buy your products that are available now. And as we said earlier, the two main sources are it's through either direct, they've got your URL, they go to you for free, or you're having to pay for it through an ad. Some stuff I'd like to share with you, which I think is quite important depending on what you're selling online. The first thing is Google Shopping is getting more and more dominant, particularly if you're selling something that's available from other sources. So for example, if you're selling other people's products, let's just say it's fashion or consumer electronics, the reality is most people will make their purchase through Google Shopping. So if you haven't got great reviews and you haven't got the best price, you won't sell them a thing. So if you're going to advertise on Google Shopping, be careful. And that share is growing. And the reality is, while Bing is a default search engine on most PCs, 90% to 95% of all traffic in the UK is sourced through a Google search engine. The next thing is, I believe that the best way to develop a relationship with your customers and the best way to invest, if you can do advertising, is through social media, not Google. Until you're more mature, and then you can maybe consider spending money. It's very expensive. The next thing is that I think it's important that you think about how you connect with customers. And if we look at the slides above, having the ability to have a mobile number or an email so you can engage with that customer is really powerful. So if you've got something new or something you want to share with a customer, the most direct way to do that, if they're following you, that's great. But if you can send them a direct message, an interesting message, offering them something exciting, that's the most effective way. And the only way you can get their subscription details if they give them to you. So when we look at the next slide and look at the different sales channels, the most effective way to do that is by selling direct to your customer. The next thing is, I think it's important that you focus on building relationships with customers. But the reality is that sometimes, and right now is a good interesting period, if you've got a lot of stock of product, you need to focus on sales. You need to generate the cash, turn your stock into cash to enable you to bring out your new range or to introduce or to start your new campaign. So however hard you try to focus on building those customer relationships, in reality, sometimes you just need to generate sales, generate cash. The next thing, I think it's really important that you keep an open mind and don't follow the herd. So I think TikTok's really exciting. Another thing that's interesting is Instagram and Facebook, you can now sell on those platforms. It's expensive, but I think it's good to try something new. And the great thing about trying something new is if you're one of the first, you'll get the platforms to support you. They may even give you some free budget to try it. So what I would say is don't follow everybody else. Don't be afraid to try something new and to adopt some of the new platforms. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is really just explain the difference between the three core sales models that we've got for businesses selling product. It could apply to services, but really this is around product. So let's just say you make shoes. So you've got your own website, but you're also selling through, say, Amazon or eBay, or through Next, or through another marketplace. But you're also selling your product to, let's say, John Lewis, who are selling your products in the store. And the reason you want to sell to, say, John Lewis, a wholesaler, as a wholesaler, you being as a wholesaler, of course, is that that's a great way, still a great way to build your brand. So however much I'll talk about how important it is to build your business online, the reality is that even when we come out of lockdown, people still want to go into stores and touch and feel product. And if you're selling an expensive item, giving people the opportunity to actually feel it and touch it in a store is always going to be valuable. Whether it's a pop-up that you can create yourself in a mall, or whether it's through a traditional retailer, don't discount it. But there are really different economics around all these different businesses. So the first thing is, it doesn't matter through what channel you sell your product is going to cost you the same in terms of the product. It still costs the same for that product that you're going to sell, whether you sell it through your own website, through a third party, through a marketplace. Delivery costs are really different. So the reality is, if you're selling through a marketplace, it's tougher than selling yourself. The reality is that they'll have service level requirements, and the risk with a marketplace is you will have to give them priority, because if you miss some of the targets, Amazon's notorious in this place. If you, let's just say there's 5 customer complaints, or you've been 1 day late on too many orders, they'll delist you. So what always happens, which I hate, is that customers or clients of mine who've got their own websites and they're selling through Amazon, eBay or Next, they end up prioritizing the marketplaces to make sure they don't get into a problem and have to find themselves being delisted. So I'm very wary about marketplaces, but the great thing about marketplaces is that what they're doing is they are marketing and promoting the products for you. And if you're selling something first in that marketplace, you get the option to determine how it be listed and how it be described on the site. It can be quite powerful for you. Customer services we talked about. It's tough through marketplaces, and of course you have to do it for your own online website, and you've got to do it well to ensure you get good ratings and people come back to you. Transaction costs, well, this covers lots of different elements. So example, it could be Klarna, if you want to give people the Klarna option. It could be you've got to offer PayPal. 45% to 50% of people use PayPal in the UK to make their online purchases. It costs you money to process a transaction through your website. If you do it through Amazon, eBay, Next, or whoever, or Etsy, for example, they will charge you commission as well. In a sense, it's almost like a proxy for them promoting your product. But the difficulty here is discovery. So if you're going to use a marketplace, either it's a unique product, or you've got to find a way for people to find your product, or try and get the marketplace to promote your brand. Otherwise, you're just lost. No one's going to find you. But when you do sell something, they'll charge you commission, at least 15%. Obviously, if you're selling through to John Lewis, there aren't any transaction costs, but of course you are going to be, and then they're marketing for you, but you're going to get a much lower margin. So the next thing is advertising. Now, I think this is a good opportunity to talk about the fact that I think you might want to be doing all 3 platforms when the business matures. Why do I say that? Because you want to obviously develop a relationship directly with your customers through your own online website. Marketplaces are a great way to, depending on your products, perhaps to accessorize other products, also to build your brand. And what's great about wholesale or being in a traditional retailer, if you're selling a high value item, what better way for customers to see it in store? Or if you don't want to do wholesale, find a way through a pop-up, or for people to, maybe you bring it around to the home to try, so they can actually experience the product. Once you get beyond a certain purchase price, unless it's consumer electronics, people are reluctant to buy without experiencing the product themselves. Last bit is about profit. There's a little blue box there, which is, it's really important that if you're selling through a retailer, they've got to make money. And traditionally, they will need, after taking account of campaigns or discounting they might have to do to sell your product, perhaps if it's not selling through really well, at least 38%. So think in terms of, if you're selling it yourself, you're looking at 70 to 75% margin at full selling price. You've got to give 38% to a retailer to make it work. But the gap between the two is, if you're selling it yourself at 75%, you've got to advertise it, promote it yourself. You've got to deal with all the customer services yourself. And obviously, you've got to process all the transactions yourselves. The next thing I'd like to talk about is Facebook and Instagram. And I think if any of you are starting out, if you can generate, maybe you've got a new fashion brand, this could be a great way to sell your product. And it's quite new, it's expensive. I'm hearing they're charging 25%. But if you've got something that's quite exciting, they like, and it's got some really good followers, particularly on Instagram, this could be a great way for you to start selling product. You'll still have to deal with all the customer services issues, but this is a great way to actually get some traction for your brand and for your business. The last thing, I talked about this before and I'll keep mentioning it, is that although it's the hardest way to sell directly yourself, because you've got to get people to your website, it's the only way where you can secure those customer details. that email, that WhatsApp address through a mobile number that you can re-engage with them. So at the end of the day, somehow you need to find a way that you can get sufficient traffic, sufficient activity through your website, so you can grow your customer list, your customer database. So when you've got something new, something exciting to share, you can go direct to them, because you spent all that money to acquire them. Now you need to find a way to get them to come back. The next thing is there are lots of, what's great about, for me, the last 6 years is, when I started doing this about 6 years ago, everybody had to build their own web platforms. You didn't have Shopify, you didn't have WooCommerce, and you certainly didn't have all the great plugins that you can subscribe to, which offer great functionality. And even in the last 2 years, now you can find great plugins where you can actually offer a loyalty scheme to customers, a referral scheme. When I say referral, that means you're rewarding customers to refer and recommend you to a friend. So loyalty, basically, the more you spend, the more you get. Referral is you reward the referring and the referrer. And then also Klarna, other payment options to give people credit. These are great ways to improve that conversion, to translate more of those visits to your site into a sale, but more importantly, to get people to come back. And I think one of the things to think about is to look at the cost of these programs versus the cost of advertising on social media and on Google. Okay, right. So what I'm going to do now, it'll be easier, probably some of you might struggle with this, but remember, we're going to share the deck, so that should help everybody. But what I want to try and do is, how do you translate all of this into a plan or into some spreadsheets that you can actually monitor performance? How do you turn all of the stuff I've talked about into some basic steps and to set some benchmarks as to what good looks like? Well, what I'll do here is just focus on the two core channels where you're selling, where you're having to fulfill the orders yourself. So that's through your own website, and marketplaces through somebody else's website. So the first thing, if you're doing it online, you've got to set yourself a budget. How much am I prepared to pay for advertising, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or whether it's Google or Bing? And then you need to then set a budget for how much you're prepared to bid. So you'll know over time what an average cost per click is going to be, and then translate that into a session. So do you remember we talked earlier about a distinction between session and visits? So when you're buying, you can pay by impression, which is just people can just see the screen, but mostly you pay for a click, which is a visit. But remember, Google, who you will use, you'll use their tools to measure performance. They'll look at a session, and the session is where someone's navigating. So you always have less sessions than visits. So I think to make this really, so you don't complicate yourself, is that, all right, you're bidding by click, but you're measuring performance by session. So say it costs you 30 pence for a click. In reality, it's going to cost you 40p for a session. Okay, so you're going to spend 10 grand, 40p is your budget for each session. That should tell you how much direct traffic, or sorry, traffic you're going to acquire to come into your website. And then you can look at the actual performance versus that. Did it cost you more? Are you getting enough clicks for that spend? The next thing is that in reality, over time, so when you start, you get zero free traffic, zero. Nobody knows you're there. Traditionally, what you would do 5 years ago is you just spend lots of money on Google. Now what you need to do is put a lot of effort and energy through social media to get people to follow you and then get them to your website. But that will cost money. But over time, zero will grow to, on average, mature businesses should be getting at least half their traffic should be free through their website. So all the businesses I work with that are perhaps maturer, that are growing quite quickly, are profitable, over half their traffic is free. They're not paying Google or Facebook to get people to their site. So either they've got reached sufficient scale that when you search for them, they go straight up the search priorities, or more likely, people know the brand. So for example, it's a brand that's well known, they'll type it in on search and the website pops up and they go straight to it. But when you start with zero, and over maybe 2-3 years, you gradually go up to 50-50. And again, you can track all this performance through the Google Analytics tool. The next thing is, so you've got your paid traffic, you've got your free traffic, gives you total traffic, your total sessions. What's your assumption for conversion? And here it's interesting. So over the last 5 years, I would say now, as people have got better at this and more efficient about getting the right type of traffic, you should be targeting 5%. What you want to get the traffic to your site that is really relevant to your business and targeting 5%. There are exceptions. You'll find that businesses that are selling that in a more crowded space, you'll have a lower conversion rate. But if you've got a good brand, you should be targeting something like 5% conversion, which means if you're getting 5% of all the visits in that period that you're looking at, people are actually making an order on your website. So that conversion, applying that conversion percentage to your traffic gives you a gross number of orders. And what you then need to do is put an average order value to that to give you your gross order value. And so an order value is really driven by two things. One is what they purchase and what the price is. So the two ways for growing your AOV is either you charge more, or a better way is to try and get customers to buy a bigger basket. So for example, if you're selling apparel, they're buying a shirt, see if you can get them to buy a tie, a belt, maybe a pair of trousers, that kind of thing. So when we look at marketplaces, obviously you're not advertising. You'll remember from the previous chart that you're paying commission to the marketplace to effectively give access to their customers, and if you can get them to market and place your product well within the website. But here, all you can do is just target volume. That's all you can really do, and then again target AOV. And the reality here is that your AOV is going to be a lot lower because it's going to be most likely one product. And in truth, the best way to look at marketplaces is that if you've got a spread of products, you've got some stuff that is commoditized, and maybe it's white t-shirts, you've got a lot of them, marketplaces come out really well. If you sell at a good price, it's a great way to sell a lot of product quickly. Okay, so by following this sort of methodology, you've got two core outputs. One is the number of orders, and one is the gross order value. And remember, what we're looking here is setting targets and then applying tactics to try and generate more traffic, but better quality traffic, so more of it converts into sales. And if we can, get existing customers to keep coming back. Right, so the next step is right, you've got your order value, how do you translate that order value into contribution or cash that you generated from that sale? So what I'd like to do here is that we talk about three core concepts that we need to consider. One is, how do you go from gross orders to sales? The next is, what costs do you capture when you're looking at gross margin? And then contribution, what does that mean, or what other costs do you take account of when measuring contribution? So the first thing is, how do we get to sales? Well, so your gross order value, that's effectively what people have paid for. But in reality, some people will send stuff back, some people won't like what they've received, and they will return it. And the scary thing is that, particularly in fashion, the returns rates can be over 30%. So whatever comes back, you need to obviously put your stock back in, put all that product back into stock, and that's a reduction to your sales, your orders, because you're sending a credit back to the customer. So that gives you net orders. And remember, if you're selling and you've reached the VAT threshold, I'm assuming everybody on this call has, is that you're charging VAT. So VAT is a sales tax, and what you're doing is collecting tax for the government based on what you're selling. So your revenue is actually the order value less the VAT. All you're doing is collecting tax for the government. And then your revenue is made up of probably two likely elements here if you're selling a product. One is what you charge for the product, and one is shipping. So if you charge a delivery charge. And one great way to get people to spend more is by having a threshold that encourages people to spend more. So on average, I think free shipping, 25, 30 quid is probably the general standard that people expect to see. So if you're going to spend 20 quid, you want a pop-up to come on your website, spend another £5 and you get free shipping. And what happens is there's nothing for £5, they'll spend another 10 or 15 pounds. Okay, so we've talked about revenue. What does margin mean? So I think the best way to think about this is to split this into two elements. One is product. So product margin is all about your cost of product, and that's it's the products that you've sold, okay? But also, when we look at the next slide, think about terminal stock. So if you're selling particularly fashion or products like maybe food, they do wear out over time. So you need to think about maybe fashion products you're just unable to sell, or it's damaged, you can't sell it, you've got to write it off, or food that's become too old, you can't sell it. or if it's beauty products that they've reached, if it's some cream, it's reached the expiry date, you've got to write that stock. You can't sell it to customers. The next is shipping, because I know one client that makes most of its money on shipping. So they're very, very aggressive on pricing, but they're really sophisticated on shipping. Lots of great shipping options, and they've got their operations working really well, and they make money by optimizing their shipping profit, which means is that they almost always charge shipping, and they're really efficient with all the couriers, and they make every sale, they make money on shipping. But for most businesses I see, shipping should not be a key driver. Almost use shipping as a way to encourage people to spend more, but you've got to focus on the cost. Royal Mail is always the cheapest, but is it giving you the best service? It can cost you, depending on how big and heavy your product is, it can get very expensive to get products to a customer. You need to understand all of that. Right, so that gets us to gross profit. So I talked a lot at the beginning about contribution, and I think this is key, and I think this often gets forgotten about. So when I work with clients, and there's lots of digital agencies, they don't talk about this enough. But you've got to think about this when you're looking at the margin you're making on your online sales or through a marketplace. The first is it costs you money to fulfill that order. You've got to store the product either in your warehouse or somebody else's warehouse. You've got to pay for racking. You've got to keep it safe. You've got to pay for the guys to pick, pack, and dispatch those products. The next is you've got to have a good customer service, whether it's all via chat or email, or whether you've got people on the phone, because something will go wrong, or whatever reason, the customer's misunderstood your listing online. It's important that you give good customer service. Otherwise, they won't come back, won't give you a good rating. They won't encourage their friends and family to come and buy from you. And the next is transaction cost. So this is really three key elements. It's either the cost of processing the transaction, so whether it's bank, whether it's PayPal, or whether it's Klarna. The next element, of course, is whether you're using Klarna for offering credit or PayPal for credit. And the last bit is whether you're paying commission to Amazon, eBay, or maybe even Instagram. So I think when you're looking at the profit, try and find a per unit charge for these key elements. So you've got an understanding when you're selling an order, whether you're actually making money from it, and then when you extrapolate that to a customer, whether the economics kind of make sense. So to wrap up before I move on to the next slide, so really to maximize gross profit, you need to think about buying better to minimize the cost of your products, and also and when you're looking at shipping, optimize it. Is it a question of maximizing the profit from shipping, or is it finding ways to encourage your customers to buy more? And on contribution, figure out how your business is structured. Don't overcomplicate it, and just think about what does it cost you to fulfill an individual order? What does it cost you to support your customers? And how much does it cost you for you to process that transaction? And then when we're looking at the ROI, we need to match the contribution, or look at the contribution as your numerator against the cost of acquiring that customer or that sale as your denominator. Back to ROI. Right. Another scary table, but remember, you're going to get this on. You're going to get the slides so you can spend some time looking at it. What I've got here is I guess a tweaked version of a client of mine that manufactures and sells shoes. I won't say who it is, and the numbers aren't quite exactly right, but it gives you an idea, because what we wanted to do, what I helped them, was to set some key metrics and benchmarks to make sure that we could scale this business up when we entered a new market. So we were looking at going from Asia into North America, and that's why we did this exercise. So what we wanted to do is to cost the key elements to replicate that business and say, could we launch this business in the US and make money from doing it? So so in this case, the one number that is right is the average price for a pair of their shoes is 120 quid. Everything else is kind of made up or a tweak of their cost structure. So the next thing, of course, is their gross margin before discount was 78%, which might sound really high, but remember, sometimes you're going to have to discount. Black Friday, you have to discount for Black Friday, which might sound nuts, but it's a great way to acquire customer details and to find ways to target them for secondary purchases. So don't dismiss Black Friday, Cyber Monday. The next thing, as we talked about earlier, the reality is some stuff that comes back, you can't resell it. Maybe it's been damaged, maybe it was damaged in the warehouse, or maybe it's just not fit to manipulate and resell. Or worse than that, maybe you just need to repackage it. The next is delivery costs, and in this case, yes, it's more expensive. You know, the reality is it's going to have to go on an aeroplane, so this isn't raw mail. But what we were good at is the pick and pack was really cheap. It was less than £1 per item. In boxes, shoes are really easy actually to store. They sit in boxes. You can sort them by size and by colour. Really easy to store compared to some products. Customer services, we struggled with this, to be honest. In a sense, what we wanted to do, we wanted to give within certain time. I think some days a week. But of course, remember, you're looking at East Coast. You've got 3 different time zones that people can speak to a customer services person, and then out of hours, you've got someone who can do chat to deal with any queries. And the biggest issue in the US is once you leave one of the big, I suppose, metropolitan hubs, deliveries take a long time. So just managing people's expectations is quite difficult. And the next is transaction costs. In this case, we didn't offer Klarna. PayPal, really key. Over half, like the UK, over half of purchases online in the US are PayPal. Next was advertising. In this case, no Google advertising, purely Facebook. And the strategy here, which I think is relevant to this call, was that we were going to focus on metropolitan areas. And the great thing about social media is that you can target areas. So we were just going to advertise in metropolitan areas, and we were going to focus on certain interests, certain age groups that we thought were the main categories of people who'd be interested in buying these products. Really expensive. But funny enough, the economics here are actually relatively good. And that what's good about this business is that on average, most customers buy more than once during the year because the shoes will wear out. The next thing in this case, this business, the way it's structured is that a key part of the business was obviously product development and also securing manufacturing in Asia. So that's quite an expensive element. So all we did here was we looked at the cost and then amortized it over our expected volume that we're going to sell over that period. But it gives you a sort of per unit cost, and the same for overheads. And to be honest, the biggest cost here is really just the structure of the business, the founder, making sure they're getting a sufficient return. Right, so here, there's really 4 things I want to talk about. So what I think are the key measures is that for this business, what was interesting was that on average, customers would purchase 1.3 times a year. And actually, if you peel that a little bit, there was a small group who were buying 4 or 5 times a year. And it's for 2 reasons. One is that this was like a training shoe, so A, they would wear out, but also each season there'd be a new colour or a new feature that would be launched, and people would like to buy something new for spring or for summer for a new season. But there were loads of customers who only buy once, but on average it's 1.3 times. So lifetime value, in this case, we felt we can only look at a 12-month period because we felt looking at a longer period we didn't think was really useful because this is still ultimately a fashion item. So 96 quid is basically 1.3 times £74, which is the contribution per order. So what we're saying is we think a customer is worth 96 quid. And in this case, the cost of acquisition is effectively applying 1.3 times the advertising cost. So in this case, the cost of acquiring the customer is £26. So this business has got an ROI of 3.7, which looks fantastic. The challenge for this business is not so much its core economics, it's supply chain, which is another story for another day. So you can see from this chart how this can be applied perhaps to your business. So, and these benchmarks will vary. So I would say that beauty products, you'd have a higher gross margin, and fashion, you'd have similarly over 80%, because you would have to take allowance of short seasons and having to discount for surplus stock toward the end of the season. Right, and to me, actually, this is the most important slide, because I think from everything I've learned over the last 6 years working with digital businesses, this is the big difference between those businesses that do well and those that don't, which is understanding who your customers are. And so what I want to do here is really pick out 3 key themes from this, which is the first one is it's really simple. The great thing about digital is data. There's lots of great data. but don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it. It's not difficult to manipulate this data. You can get 250,000 lines on Excel. You don't need to hire expensive agencies. You can do a lot of this yourself by downloading the data out of Google or out of Shopify or WooCommerce or Magento or whatever, and manipulate it yourself. So the first thing is to segment your data. And the two things to focus on is the one I think all the agencies tell you is think about time cohort, which is if they've just bought from you, target them again in 3 months' time and then target them 6 months later. I'm not sure that always works. I think what you need to do is understand where the money is, which is this RFM, which I'll talk about in a sec. Basically, where the money is in terms of who's spending money with you. The next thing is CRMs, capturing this data. And I would always start with something. There are some free systems out there which cost you nothing. Keep it really simple. And if you're going to use an agency, only use an agency if you can do it yourself, which might sound counterintuitive. Because in my mind, you can only instruct an agency and manage them well if you know what they're supposed to be doing. You're hiring them for two reasons. One is you need the extra help because you can't do it yourself. And the second reason is it's more efficient to give it to a third party than use someone within your team. Ideally, I think it's best that you get the knowledge within the business, and the agencies should be a last resort. I really do think that. I'm not a huge fan. And the reality is that the best businesses that I know, one of the key drivers, individuals in the business, is a digital marketeer, really understands it well, and more likely than not, they've built this themselves. They built all the social media content themselves. They do the bidding themselves, and they manage it really, really effectively. If they're going to use an agency, it's last resort. Maybe they've only done it because they're going into, say, Germany, and they're just struggling with the language. The next thing about intelligence, and this is really important because my view is social media is the best way to generate interest and get followers and people to get onto your website. And what's great about social media is you can segment when you're targeting people, particularly on ads, by location, by demographic, and in terms of age, gender, all that kind of good stuff, but also interests. It's more expensive, but you can refine it down. And back to the example of the shoe business, they had some really great stats from certain key markets where they knew which was the age group that was most interested. They knew what the profile was in terms of jobs and interests. So when they did the advertising, it was really very, very effective. Because if you use the lookalikes that Facebook's selling, unless you've got lots of data, it's really expensive and doesn't tend to work. So before I talked about RFM, which is this divide and rule of your data. So RFM is really about, it's just a simple way to capture 3 key measures. So if you do this on a spreadsheet to figure out where the money is why don't you just score it in three simple ways. One is score most highly who bought from you most recently, score most high the customers who bought from you most frequently, and score most high the ones who spend the most money with you. I can tell you now, if you've got a customer list of 35,000, there'll be less than 1,000 customers who probably represent more than half your business, because they're the ones who just love your brand, they just love shopping online, and they keep coming back for more. When you know it's them, then if you want to target or get some great feedback about how you expand your business, speak to them. You can do research with them, but you can also get them to embrace a loyalty program, and more importantly, a referral program. If they love you, reward them to recommend you to their friends. Don't spend money with expensive influencers, get your customers to influence for you. So, and before I wrap up, just some simple strategies, just in terms of building that retention, which is this whole concept of you spend all that time and effort and energy to get that customer to buy from you. How do you get them to come back? So the first thing is that the reality is price is the most effective driver. And I can tell you now, if you go to a digital agency, they'll tell you the best campaign will be a discount. But the truth is, you need to get away from that. You need to focus on newness and creating new exciting offers for people. Because if customers know you're known to discount, they'll just wait for the next sale. And right now, because everyone's got too much stock, that's something if you can, to avoid it. Or if you're discounting, make sure you're merchandising just certain products where you just need to turn stock into cash. Focus on you, focus on stuff that's interesting to people. I think another thing that's really a good tactic to use is to compare loyalty, the cost of loyalty through referral schemes versus advertising, it might be cheaper to actually reward your existing customers to recommend you through free product, through gifts or discounts or a point system than actually spending more money on advertising. And that's something I think you should seriously consider. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you've all got something from that. But and I think at the end of the day, why am I doing this? Well, I wanted to share some insights, some experience that hopefully you find useful. But at the end of the day, if you've enjoyed this, you found it useful, please give whatever you can afford to the Student Hardship Fund. And it'll be great for all of us if we can raise some more money and help some students get through lockdown. Many thanks.